Welcome back. I've been excited for this episode because it's been planned for a while now. It is with someone that I've worked on a project with, and I'm just going to introduce that first. And then we'll get into our conversation for this podcast. So, I first met Dr. Hayley James, who is a senior research fellow at Aston University, and she works for the Center of Personal Financial Well-being. And yes, she's doing really great stuff. And we collaborated at the start of June where we hosted an event. And this event was around the Real Accounts project that they had done. And they worked on this for a year when they were researching kind of the day-to-day accounts of people that have different situations and just seeing the details of how money moves between their accounts. And there's so much great research that's come out of it. I'm going to just flash up and hopefully in front of you, you can see, you can go onto the website and read how that has worked out and a report as well. And yeah, so the event that we then hosted, it was at Aston Uni, which I love because I went to Birmingham City University, but my first choice was actually Aston University. And just having the opportunity to then work with them 2 decades later is just mind blowing to me. But yeah, it was a great opportunity. And here is a clip of how the day went.
We're here today for a workshop about financial support relationships. What we mean by that is where two or more people are supporting each other financially.
We shared so much in one afternoon and looking forward to what are the next steps? What can we change?
I think coming to these kind of events is extremely worthwhile. You get to meet different people, different sectors of society, people helping people in very different ways.
My key takeaway was listening to everybody in the room, talking about financial relationships, financial well-being, and just to hear it being spoken about more is really refreshing.
I was really pleased with having got the invite. It's actually turned out to be better than I expected. I had the opportunity to meet people from other sectors, and if anyone gets the opportunity to participate, I say do it. You always learn something.
Welcome back, everybody. Today I am joined with someone who is doing so much work and so much research in the background around financial wellness. She is a senior research fellow at the Center for Personal Financial Wellbeing at Aston Business School. And she's been doing loads of research around various topics that we're going to go into today. But I'm really honored to be joined by Dr. Hayley James. Hi, Hayley.
Hi, Arlyne. Thank you so much for inviting me.
The pleasure's all mine. And I think there's so much in terms of like academics that they can bring to a conversation because you've done the research. So you're bringing the fact and hopefully kind of what the themes of what we discuss on this podcast and what we know from just kind of helping people with financial wellness. I'm sure it can be echoed in the work that you're doing in the actual research. So I was really keen to sit down and talk to you today. But this isn't our first project. We've worked together a couple of months ago, it feels like now.
Yeah, it's flown, isn't it? I'm still working on the report. So yes, it was the start of June that we hosted a workshop together, and it was a very successful workshop.
Agreed. I really enjoyed it. But before we get into any, specifics, I just wanted to hear from yourself, like a little introduction and a bit of your history. What led you to the position that you're in now?
It's a bit of a twisty-turny story, I think, is how I'd summarize it. I studied my undergraduate. I studied business. And part of the reason I studied business was I was from a fairly kind of lower income family and I wanted to do a job that I knew I was going to get paid to do. And I was very focused on, getting out of university and earning money. And I did my undergraduate at Warwick Business School and came out and got a job as a consultant for Deloitte, working on their starting on their graduate scheme and then working on big kind of IT and transformation projects. And I mean, I was thrilled because the money was great and it felt like I was doing something really innovative and good and, you know, pushing the world forward and things. But over time, I basically got a bit disillusioned with the work I was doing as a consultant. And mostly it was because it was always about money. There was always just this baseline of money. And so many things that would have been good for the world weren't being done because of money. And it was because we couldn't measure the impact of things like sustainability or social benefits. There just wasn't a way to bring them into the framework. And I guess I was, even though, you know, consulting is a business and they weren't really setting out to do those things, but still I ended up feeling a bit disillusioned and thought, where do I go next? I decided to take a year off. And at the time I was living in Peckham in South London, and the closest university was Goldsmiths. And I thought, you know what, maybe I'll just do a master's at Goldsmiths during a year off and use that time to think about where I go next. And I looked at the course kind of catalogue, and the cheapest master's was in anthropology. And at the time, I didn't even know what anthropology meant. So I thought, okay, I'll go find out. I'd started reading up on it and I thought, it sounds quite interesting. And when I got into studying anthropology, I looked particularly at kind of economic anthropology. And what I found was the answer to some of my questions about why there was so much focus on money and finance, and why finance was this growing thing in our personal lives, as well as kind of on a global scale and an industry scale. And I just kind of got really into some of these ideas. And the thing that always stood out for me is the real difference between how we do finance or money in our everyday lives versus how the system thinks we should be doing it. So when you read kind of policy documents or industry documents, these assumptions they make about rational decision making and you know, these sort of things. And that's what fascinated me. And since then, I've kind of focused my research on this space of what do people actually do in their real lives, mostly because I think the system should reflect what we do rather than we change behaviors to fit the systems, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And I think there's a little bit within your story in terms of, you know, when you're younger, we're told to kind of go for a certain career, or you just think, I want to be well off, I want to be comfortable in my life. And then the behavior then was that you went and looked for a job in a really, you know, top 4 kind of company to then make that happen. But then that didn't sit well with you, and I'm so glad that then you went and then soul searched in terms of how can I actually do something about the situation here. But you're so right, like our actions sometimes don't mirror how we actually feel about society, and it's great that then you're finding ways of quantifying that, because it's not easy, I can imagine.
No, definitely not. And I mean, now I look back and they're the things that confused me when I was working in those industries. And like now I understand it's because of things like social capital. So I was, you know, being from a kind of lower income family, I didn't have the networks or the support or the resources that some of my peers did. And there were people in that company who were like, you know, it was kind of, you know, wealthy, educated men frequently who were coming into those industries and just had the connections and the networks to be able to do things. And I couldn't understand how to do it. I couldn't understand what it was. And I didn't realize what was happening. And it's only now that I've, you know, been researching for years and I understand things like class and how capitals operate, that I'm like, oh, that's what I was experiencing, you know? So part of what I do, part of my work now, which is, you know, around finance and every day, is always trying to highlight to everyday people, to normal people who might think that they're doing something wrong. I really want to always get the message across that you're not, okay? You're not wrong. It's the system that's unfair or unequal or twisted or however you want to put it. You know, the system doesn't suit what we need rather than you being wrong. I don't want people to think they're wrong.
Yes, because there's so much, you know, now, especially even on social media, where people are being told that you're not where you want to be because you're buying too much coffee, or you're paying for Netflix, and it's you rather than the actual system. And I think it's
Avocado toast.
yeah,
People going on about, oh, in my day you didn't buy avocado toast. Yeah, but in your day you also had a different set of financial responsibilities and privileges. There's people today, right? There's very few people that if they stopped buying avocado toast once a week, would they be able to buy a house because of that, right? That's not the distinguishing factor. So yeah.
We can do the maps and then find that actually we will not come anywhere close to them changing their lives.
I think someone did. I think I saw a study where they added it up and said, look, that's just not it. You'd buy, if you stopped eating avocado toast through your 20s, I think you'd be able to buy a house when you're like 50, but you've like missed the boat. Do you know what I mean? You need the resources at the right point for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that and for sharing your story as well. Do you mind giving us like a favorite or maybe a research topic that you've done so far that comes to mind that you could highlight?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I think the thing I'd mentioned there, just building on the avocado toast conversation, is when I was looking at pension saving decisions and I was talking to people about how they approached their pension saving decision, like how much to save. And the idea was not to decide what were they doing was right or wrong. It was more to understand the factors that influenced it. And the thing that came through really strongly was what I call the threshold adult effect. And this is this idea that there were lots of young people who were working full time and, maybe in quite good jobs, quite stable jobs. Sometimes they were automatically enrolled into a pension as well already. So they were technically pension saving, but like at a very minimal level. And they all used this idea that when I said, oh, are you saving for a pension? Are you thinking about saving for a pension or thinking about your pension at all? They'd all say, oh, no, not yet. I'm not a real adult. It was so common. I'm not a real adult. It's like once I'm a proper adult, that's when I'll start thinking about a pension. So this is why I called them threshold adults, right? They were like on the threshold of it. And it was like that what they thought made them a real adult kind of changed. But a lot of the time it was having a stable job. So the people I talked to were on kind of graduate schemes where they had to move around, or they were in training still, or they just weren't in a career that they felt was like the career they wanted to be in. So stable job was part of it. An amount of income was sometimes part of it. Sometimes people said, once I'm earning X amount of money, that's when I'll be able to save. But it was very rarely about the objective amount. It was more tied to the career status. So once I qualify, my money will go up to X and that's when I'll save, that sort of dynamic. Sometimes it was about buying a house. That was a very common one. Once I've bought a house, that's when I'll think about a pension as a kind of priority list. And sometimes it was about kind of life milestones. So passing 30 was often mentioned as one, like once you turn 30, that's when the time you might be ready to start thinking about the future. But also things like getting married or even having children seem to feed into this idea that you are now a real adult and you could start thinking about the long-term future. And I think this is so common, right? And it resonated with me because I think I did exactly the same thing. And I see this in lots of people's conversations. The other interesting thing was we saw the other side of it. So there were some people who were quite young, but were quite actively pension saving. And when I said, well, how come you're saving so much? They said, oh, because my parents helped me buy a house and I've already got a house, or I've already got a partner, or, they use these same milestones to describe the experience of going over that point and then starting to pension save. So it seemed quite kind of, certain that this is a clear effect that's going on. But of course, like none of our policy or financial advice stuff really reflects that. Everything is just saying, young people, you should save into a pension as well as doing all these other things that are really important to you. And I've been saying on the basis of that for a few years, I think we should be saying to young people, like, listen, it's great if you can save for a pension, but actually maybe getting these other things are more important, right? And this subjective thing of how you feel is important when it comes to finances. We shouldn't just be dismissing it and saying there's a right or a wrong. It's down to how you feel, how do you feel confident about managing your money and what feels like the right thing for you to do? Yeah.
You touched on such great things there in terms of the way you feel, but how I was just going back in terms of how I felt as well, like maybe in my mid 20s. And when I turned 25, my friends always say that I was now acting like I've just turned 40. Everything that I kept on saying that I need to be serious about my life, even though I was studying for accounting at that point. But I just felt like I was so behind, and I was really just trying and forcing certain things because I thought that I needed to be at a certain level at 25. And it was completely different when I turned 30, where I was so relaxed and I felt like I was just turned 21 again. And I think it's how we feel sometimes also is determined by our environment, by, culture, traditions, by society as well, what we're made to feel
Yeah.
too. So you touched on a great point in terms of, well, you might not have what like you're not set up to be able to achieve certain things already, and to give yourself some time, because a lot of people feel like they are behind and now I should be an adult because I turned 30. But all those things that you just mentioned, like, do I have a house? Am I married? And da 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 da. I haven't ticked them off. And yeah, a lot of people can then feel like they're not an adult, even though they are in other respects.
Yeah, definitely. It's called this idea is called social aging, by the way. This
Ah,
idea that so we all have like a chronological age, and we use that chronological age to like understand our pathway through life. But actually, social age is like how you feel about your age. What phase do you feel at? Where do you feel? And
mhm.
we use chronological age as an indicator to measure that up. Like you said, like people might be like, oh, I'm 30, I should have a partner by now, or whatever it is. But those milestones are also not important for some people, right? Some people, well, actually, I'm turning 40 soon, and people keep saying to me like, "Oh, it's the big birthday. How do you feel?" And I'm like, I don't know. It doesn't feel important to me, this one.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it changes, right? Fluctuates through your life, how you understand where you are in your position and things. Which, yeah, I definitely don't think we think about enough when it comes to kind of finance things or achievement things, because it's all like go, 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 do the most you can. You've always got to do your best and be responsible. We
Yeah.
don't give ourselves that room to have that space to be.
No, and it's so unfortunate. And I think, like, on that subject as well, how do kind of the financial pressures, how could they manifest emotionally or psychologically? Have you seen that in your research?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a more recent project I did, which Arlyne, you and I have spoken about a lot before, called the Real Accounts Project. So on that project, it was a collaborative project with Nest Insight and Glasgow Caledonian University. We did financial diaries, which is where we follow people for kind of a period of time. This was 10 months. And we talked to them each month about their money and what they were spending their money on, what was changing, how they were feeling about it, all of this stuff. And it's such a great methodology because it means you get to really understand what people are doing with their money and how they feel about it, especially because money's a bit taboo to talk about, isn't it? So often you find you just have one interview with people, you don't always get to the bottom of it, and there are so many complexities and interactions and things. So these kind of diary studies are great ways to get loads of proper understanding about how people do money. But one of the things we noticed in there was just, especially for people who were on lower and fluctuating incomes, we were looking at people with volatile incomes especially, just how much management goes into thinking about money just to get by. Like, we had some households who were doing thousands of transactions each month because they were trying to kind of move money between accounts, sometimes to put money aside for certain things, like helping them budget, sometimes to try to save. But like sometimes just, something unexpected comes in and they had to reach into different pots, or different family members had to contribute. And it often came to like thousands of transactions each month that we could see in the records that were coming in. And it's so much brain power, right? It's taking up so much space. And that is something that's been increasingly talked about in the financial world, about how, especially for people on lower incomes or with pressured financial situations, just how much brain space that takes up, just how much like capacity. And when you think about the knock-on effects of that on your well-being, your work situation, I think it's something we should be way more active on. We should be trying to support people in these crisis situations, or these not crisis situations, actually, just like the ongoing pressures are so significant. We should be trying to help people way more than we are, because it's not just a part of life. It's another it's a whole level of like stress that we don't really account for in the modern world.
And I love that you've just kind of pointed out, because we hear that, financial stress is one of the biggest stress causes. And it's like, yes, it would be because it's stress. And okay, when things are not working out financially, you know how that feels. But I'm glad that you managed to quantify it in terms of, like, here's an example. It's because maybe someone is going through loads of transactions just to make ends meet. And it's probably just like £5 as well. It's not large amounts that they're dealing with. And you've managed to kind of just show, like, this is an example of how it could turn into actual stress emotionally. So I like that. And in the Real Accounts project as well, there's so many different examples that you have. And I don't know if you mind sharing another kind of example of how people manage their day to day.
Yeah, like what in like a kind of one where they're overcoming a challenge, or
One where they manage to make things work on a day-to-day basis. I don't know if you've got another example that you could share of that kind.
yeah, I'm trying to rack my brains to remember what I mentioned in the workshop now as well. Okay, I guess a really interesting one that always stood out to me was one participant who was paid weekly rather than monthly. And, a lot of our system expects that you get a kind of monthly income, right? That you get paid once a month and all your bills come out and everything, and that's it, done for the month. And that's just not true. There's so many people who get paid weekly or on other frequencies in different ways. But this one participant who got paid weekly, and they had a really detailed system of managing their money each week. So what they would pay each week to make sure that they were keeping up with their bills and expenses through the month. And they told me that they created a rolling calendar for themselves. So each month they would make like a 3-month view going forward of their usual expenses and when they would pay them each week, but also which week they would pay them. And also then like additional things layered over that. And they were saying, well, sometimes, say if your gas bill comes out on the 21st, but sometimes the 21st is in week 3 and sometimes the 21st is in week 4. So they always had to have this calendar that they made themselves to try to track all that down. And I just thought that, again, that's a kind of really innovative way of managing it, right? That this person has created a system for themselves. But also what stood out from their account was they had a housemate and they also had an ex-partner who they shared custody of children with. And there was an element of they were partly able to manage their money well because their connections, the people in their lives, like almost helped them buffer the timings. So their housemate would pay the rent once a month. And the housemate didn't mind when the participant sent them the money, as long as it was before the date the bill was due. And similarly with the kind of child support payments they had to make, the ex-partner didn't mind when that came, as long as it was in the month. So they were almost able to work this weekly schedule because they had some flexibility from the people they were dealing with, who were friends and family. Whereas, if all your payments are going to a housing association or energy companies and that, they're probably less flexible. They're not offering you that sort of flexibility or that buffering to allow for a weekly payment schedule. So yeah, I thought that was a really interesting example of how people are kind of slightly ingenious in how they manage their money and do things that reflect their own needs, within this big system that doesn't always fit their needs exactly.
And also, if you are going to go to an institution, then now you're dealing with interest rates. Whereas if it's just between you and someone like a family member or your friend, then it's just kind of being exchanged here and there. But I like that. A lot of people find ways of just making it work. And
well, this flexi payment discussion is something that came up in our workshop, right? And I think this is really important, that I think there should be something around like you can pay your bills up to a week early or up to a week late without penalty. I really think that should be an interesting thing. Or you can just flex the amount you pay, especially as people are having increasingly unpredictable incomes, right? With job precarity and the industries that people are working in. It's not like most people are not on a fixed monthly wage anymore. So our expenses need to suit the way our wages work. So yeah, so I think things like flexi payment or things like that are going to be really important in the future.
I really do hope so, because the research shows that it will be really beneficial for a lot of people. And why is it important to talk about finance as an everyday experience rather than kind of like the technical financial jargon that we find?
Right. Okay. Here's where I get my kind of feminist hat on, to be honest, my intersectional feminist hat. Okay. So I think talking about money and finance has always been a bit of a taboo, especially in the UK, where it's always been like something that, isn't talked about openly. But in the last 30, 40 years since where finance was kind of deregulated and consumer finance kind of started to grow, what we've seen is that finance is now part of our everyday lives, our everyday experience. You can't live without engaging with finance. Everything from student loans to pensions, housing, even like, what was I looking at the other day? Oh, education things like training courses now offer you payment plans and things like that. It's all been financialized. What I mean by that is there are now financial principles being engaged within the products and financial terms and conditions for being able to engage with these aspects of everyday life. Even, supermarkets offering credit cards, that's an example of financialization, right? Wouldn't have been a thing. If you think back before that wouldn't have been a thing. It's kind of crazy that it even is a thing. Other countries don't have it, right?
You can even get, sorry to interrupt you, but you can even get your takeaway now, even if it's £10, you can pay over like 3 payments.
Yeah. Like the buy now, pay later
Pay
thing
later,
has just
yes.
like grown so much. So so this is part of the fabric of our lives, right? And we could debate if we think it's wrong or right, but it's there. The challenge is for me, and this is where I get all intersectional feministy about it, is that the way these systems have been designed, they've been designed with a very, let's say, heteronormative perspective. So they've really been designed by quite privileged men, and probably white men, we can easily prove that through research, who have a specific view of how the world operates and the way the world should operate. And those norms they build into the products that they design. And we see this in all aspects of finance. So, for example, in pension saving, pensions assume that you work steadily all through your career and that you don't take a career break. Now, that is only the experience of that is limited to fairly privileged men. It's not that that's a widespread thing, right? Not even when we first of all think about women and caring breaks. So most women won't work, most women are mothers and won't work steadily over their lives. But then also when you think about the experience of job insecurity, migration experiences, ill health, all those things would mean that you're not going to be able to steadily accumulate over your life in the way that the pension system expects you to. And as soon as you don't steadily accumulate, the pension system doesn't do as well for you. You don't benefit from it as much. So yeah, there's lots of examples like that. One I think about a lot is, one that's also talked about a lot, not just me, like mortgages and credit cards, right? What you're allowed to borrow in terms of mortgage or credit cards is often judged based on your income. But your income as a woman is a function of a gendered landscape. So you probably have a lower income than a man in your equivalent position. That's nothing to do with either of your responsibility or ability to pay back or your financial know-how or anything. It's just purely because we live in an unequal world. So any product that judges you based on your income is inherently biased towards privileged men. That's basically it. So part of my reason for talking about finance and talking about finance in this way is that I think we need to break down these kind of power barriers, and we need to give more voice to perspectives that say, actually, this is how these groups experience this, and we need to correct this. We're not just going to let it go. We need to do something to address the way these systems work. And there are ways. They're slow forming, but increasingly we are seeing things happen which are taking account of real life experiences. Not as fast as I'd like. We've got a long way to go. And especially when we think about all of the axes of intersectional experience that are being, not being included at the moment in the way the financial systems look at the world. But we're working on it.
That's great. I mean, it can be faster because when we look at other things, look at how fast we can move when we're developing technology. So I think it's a cop out actually in terms of like not moving as fast as we can in certain
Yeah.
things. When the pandemic happened, we moved very quickly to adapt to that situation. So if we
Yeah.
wanted, I think we could make a change within a year.
Yeah, you're quite right. You're quite right. And I mean, a lot of people talked about fintech as being the kind of, oh, fintech will democratize these sort of systems. And it hasn't really. There are some things around the edges, but fintech does have the potential to be quite revolutionary. It's just that at the moment, it's still embedded in the same power structures. What we need is break down the power structures and then we can get the solutions going. But yeah, that's the sticking point at the moment.
Yeah. And when you were talking, I was like, well, that you're literally describing the pension gap, what's happened there, and also the pay equality gap right now, especially between kind of like men and women and the knock-on effects. So if I'm not earning as much right now as a man, then I can't invest, for the future. Then there's a knock-on effect if it's not addressed immediately.
Oh, yeah. It's like hugely cumulative, isn't it? Because investment is cumulative, right? You
Mhm.
save a bit, you get more investment, you get more returns, and it keeps going and keeps going. So I have a book coming out later this year. And in that, I'm trying to argue that the pensions gap is an inherently feminist issue that we should all be way more worried about, because we talk about the pensions gap, and we talk about the pay gap, and that's bad. But that's in the present. What's happening with the pensions gap is these inequalities are accumulating and they're multiplying into the future. So the pensions gap is even bigger, and it's not going to go away easily. It's not going to go away, very soon. I think there was some research done which showed that, I think it was like Scottish widows who said the first woman to have an equal pension to a man will be born in 2025, I think. So
My
like it
God.
won't be till the end of this century that we have anywhere near equal pensions. It's
My
insane, isn't it?
jaw just dropped
Yeah.
because what do you mean? That means that we aren't going to see that.
No.
And I really hope that that's actually achievable, that
Yeah.
it goes
Because
down
like
that direction.
the pay gap has to improve, and I think there's something like we're not going to get equal pay until the 2050 or something, right? They're
Mm.
saying we're still 30 years off equal pay, but then even after equal pay, it would take so long for wealth, especially pensions wealth, to kind of even out as well, that we're so far away from it. And I mean, most of the solutions are just women save more, right? And women on lower incomes with all these other pressures, women aren't going to be able to reset this structure, not by themselves.
No, it's a system thing. It definitely needs to be addressed at that level.
Mm.
And what would you say in terms of education? Would it pay? Because I think the theme in terms of your answers have been very much it needs to be addressed overall, of course, by the powers that be, government institutions. But what about education? Does that play a part?
Yes. So I'm not a huge proponent of financial education, mostly because I think when you look at a lot of the way financial education is done, it's very individualized, and it completely forgets to talk about that landscape that we've just discussed, right, of structural inequality. But that being said, there are times when financial education is shown to work and to help people. And I'd never want to say that people shouldn't be educated. I think absolutely people should be educated. I think the important things for me are, to what extent does it help people be more confident in what they're doing? Because I think one of the huge challenges about all of this, whether we're talking about a structural perspective or a individual perspective, is like when people feel they're like not good at something or they're not confident with something, it just means that it's so much harder for them, and it's so much harder for them to see the wood to the trees. And some of the stuff that is actually that we do around finance, it seems scary, but once you get into it, it's not as scary. You just need to go through it once and then you can learn and feel more confident dealing with it in future. So I think there is a really important space for financial education. I just think it shouldn't be the be all and end all of what we talk about. The other side, which is increasingly coming up from the research that I've been doing, is actually the importance of community around finance. Now, when you look at whether financial education, if you look at how financial education has been assessed, sometimes it's assessed as it's really positive and sometimes it's assessed as it's not so good, or there's not been any like long-term impact. And I have this feeling that the places when financial education works the best is when what it's done is it's offered people a safe space to talk about their finances. It's brought people together and allowed them to share how they feel in a way that wasn't judgmental or wasn't like salesy, you know? Some of that is because in the research that I've done, people have often said that when we've done the diaries research, for example, people have said, oh, it's just really nice to have a space to talk about your money. You know, you can always go online and find evidence or find, information and stuff. But actually, people seem to benefit from having this safe space. And I'm kind of connecting what I see in my qualitative work to what we see in the ratings or the assessment of financial education. And I think that's what is lining those things up, that financial education is good when it gives people a safe space to feel better about talking about their money. So that I think that's important going forward about education. And I think that kind of chimes with the work you do, Arlyne, as well, right? About giving
Yeah.
people a community.
And I was really just smiling because, like, I've heard that as feedback that sometimes it's not what we're talking about because they can easily research it or Google it, but it's just the safe space and people feeling like they can ask a question without being made to feel like they're stupid for not knowing it as an adult, quote. And yeah, so I'm glad that we're offering this service as well, just to make sure that people can ask if they need to.
Yeah, definitely. We see it's like people in the real account study, obviously, we're talking there for 10 months was quite a long time. And they said they didn't see that their behaviors had changed during the study, but they felt differently from having those repeat interactions in that safe space. They said, I think one participant said that they felt like the research had switched lights on in areas of their brain. It's a
Yeah.
really nice way of putting it, right? So things
Yeah.
that were in the darkness before, it felt like, someone had pulled a chain and a light had come on, and now, so they hadn't changed their behavior, but in future they could see that they would be able to do something because the light had now been switched on.
That's you need to add that as the tagline to the whole project.
It's nice, isn't it? Yeah, we're still working on outputs, as you well know. So, maybe at some point we'll do a report or something just about that, because I think it's a really important thing to talk about.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you for sharing. And we will not move past the fact that you are writing a book and it's not out until, do you know the exact like date or the month?
Yeah, it's the 15th of November it's going to be published, but it is
Amazing.
already on Amazon, I found out. So you can pre-order it at Amazon, which is amazing. I found it, was told, and then found it on Amazon, and I think that was a huge thing. Having written a book and then seeing it on Amazon was a bit like, wow, oh my God.
Yay. You should be really proud of yourself.
Yeah, thank
What
you.
is the name of the book?
It's called Pension Saving in a Gendered Life Course, which
Brilliant.
it's a bit wordy, isn't it? I was always trying to think of a way to cut it down, but I just couldn't. But there's a very famous book called The Gendered Life Course of Pension Saving by a fantastic author. Oh my God, her name has just gone from my head. It was written, I think, in the 90s or early noughties, and it was a kind of quantitative understanding of pensions as a gendered life course experience. And what I wanted to do with my book is bring in more qualitative research to talk about how people, because that was kind of quantitative and arm's length. This was about actually, how people were approaching this and seeing how these different experiences unfolded through their pension saving experiences. And that's why, I kind of riffed on the title to bring in my qualitative vignette.
It feels like there's a theme in terms of your style of research and presenting things. You really want to understand people's experiences, and it's great that then we can get a glimpse of that from your book. How was the process of putting it together? How long has it taken you?
Oh my gosh. You know what? The really scary thing is that I've been talking to the publisher, who is called Agenda. They're a great publishers. I think this conversation started back before COVID. I'm pretty sure we were talking about this in 2019. So a long time. I mean, properly writing it's only taken me about a year to write it
Okay.
properly. but then I get a bit more time because then it got reviewed and I got feedback from people as well, which was really helpful. The process of writing, I really enjoyed. Yeah, I loved writing the book. I had a little routine where I would, on a weekend, go to a local cafe, take my little dog, and we would sit there and I'd have a nice coffee and I'd do kind of two hours work on a Saturday morning. But actually that meant that I got a load of work done. I was really productive in those 2 hours. So that was part of my process. Has to have a coffee or a treat involved, of course. I wonder how much it cost me. Should have added all up, right? But yeah, it was hard. I think like the harder thing was the time spent thinking about exactly how I wanted to do it. And that took more time. That probably took a few years to get to a point where I was like, I know what I want this book to be. And then writing it came quite fluidly, actually.
I love that. I love that story. And I'm excited to buy a copy, and we'll definitely add a link because it's already available to pre-order, which is great. So we'll add a link for anybody that wants to pre-order right now and then just get it in the post when it arrives.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much. Yeah. And I'd love to hear feedback once you get to read it and things. Yeah. Hopefully I'll write more books in the future. I tried to make it very like not too academic as well. It's not it's not a super long book. It's called a pivot style. Actually, is it called? I think pivot might be just an academic book, but it's a shorter book and it's not, I tried not to use too many like big words or flowy sentences, you know? Yeah. I don't believe in that. I think like communication is better when it's clear.
Yes. Yes, because you lose a lot of people when you kind of go off on a financial word jargon.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely.
Amazing. I love that. So looking forward to that. But just kind of right back to your day job, we would say, even though it feels like everything is kind of linked to like your passion, which is really great. But at the moment, is there a project that you're working on? And if you can share to just let us know what you're researching right now.
Working on. Essentially, I've always got a few things at different stages. But actually, the most of the things I'm working on at the moment are kind of writing up data from real accounts. So there's a few things within that. One being related to the workshop we ran, which was around these kind of relationships, financial support relationships, and how the ways in which people support each other when it comes to finance, and how the things people need to make those relationships more functional and easy, you know, because I guess like a lot of our financial systems just assume we all do finance by ourselves, and we don't. We tend to work with other people and share with other people and things. So that's one element. But the other thing that I've got on at the moment is some research we've just finished collecting data for around fathers and childcare costs. And that was very interesting. So working with a colleague of mine who's called Emily Christopher, who looks at kind of household decisions around work and labour and things. We talked to men about how they navigated childcare costs with their partners. So a lot of our work just assumes that it's mothers, right, who deal with childcare costs. And to some extent that's proved, you know, that's pretty true. We know through evidence that frequently it's just mothers who look after that burden. And in my research, what I saw, there's lots of mothers opted out of pension saving because of the cost of childcare. So as a kind of trade-off, right, that like when they returned to work, they said, you know, I'm earning so little money because of childcare costs that I'm going to opt out of my pension. Whereas their partner might still have been, who'd continued in work, would still have been paying into their pension as standard. So we thought, yeah, you know, let's talk to some fathers. You know, it's not I've had these conversations, and it was really interesting. We spoke to, I would say, privileged fathers who are on quite high incomes, and fathers who consider themselves quite involved in their child's lives, because I think, why would they come forward for interview otherwise, right? But what we saw was it's really interesting that even though these fathers were kind of like very aware of their children's lives and very engaged with being equal with their wives, like often they were saying, you know, or their partners, me and my wife do our best to share things equally, there were still so many gender inequalities within the relationships. So things like we saw a lot of mothers working reduced time, so like 5 days in 4 to have a day off with the child. And when we said, well, did the like as the dad, did they do that? They were like, oh no, it wasn't right for my career, or I wouldn't be able to do that in my line of work, or things like that. And it's just it's not as bad as the inequalities around women taking time off, but it is still an inequality, right? That the woman is now dealing with more pressure.
Yes.
Reduced time. Another interesting one is where there was family members involved in care of the child. It was almost always a grandmother. So it's like, while one woman was freed up to go to work and earn money, another woman was conducting unpaid labor for the family. So there's still gender inequalities there. It's interesting because these fathers really were like probably doing their best, and I don't want to like say they weren't. It's just that these kind of gendered inequalities around money and things like that are so built into our psyche. But one thing that was kind of interesting is how many fathers had taken responsibility for paying childcare. So even if they weren't the one that did a lot of the pickups or drop-offs, it was like behind the scenes they were managing the invoices and things like that.
Okay.
And I think that's a legacy of finance being thought of as a kind of man's domain. So many women manage household money, but finance, when it comes to things like invoices, planning, using tech systems, that's seen as something slightly different.
Interesting. And something that you mentioned as well was how you described the perception in terms of what they thought that they're doing and how much that they're helping. Actually, in some people's heads will be like, we're 50-50. But actually, when you then write it all down and see the actual behaviors, it cannot work out that way. And I'm really glad that there's a piece of research that's highlighting this, because it's so easy to just say this, that women feel overwhelmed. We saw it during the pandemic.
Yeah.
A lot of women kept on saying that I'm doing, teaching the child XYZ, and I'm still working as well. I'm still working from home, but found that fathers weren't as stressed out. But actually, a lot of good came out from that period, because a lot of fathers then became hands-on. But now you're kind of quantifying, you've got research in terms of, yeah, it is true. We can see that this is how it actually works out.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and it's funny, isn't it? Just social change is slow, and it's hard because you just oscillate between these things, and you don't want to diminish people's efforts, but at the same time, we've got to recognize how far we have to go with some of these things, right? And you're right that actually seeing the experience of COVID did change a lot of people's perspectives. So how do we change those perspectives, right? And how do we give people tools for taking this forward? In one of my projects, really interestingly, I had a very financially savvy woman in one of my projects who was having her first child, like she was pregnant at the time. And she told me that she'd come up with an agreement where her husband was paying her pension while she was on like having a baby.
Amazing.
Yeah. But like, people don't even know that's possible, right? That's probably a really easy solution, and most men won't even miss whatever that cost to them is, right? But like, pension schemes don't talk about that as something possible. If you go to the website of a pension scheme, it's so hard to find out about like maternity leave, never mind like the possibility that your partner could contribute on your behalf, and all these other complexities. So there's so many. I think highlighting issues of like what's possible, having new tools to help people navigate these situations is really important.
Great. Thank you. And that's a great example for what women could do in the short term as well. This has been such a great conversation. I think we definitely need a part 2 when we're closer to the book coming out, and I'll have a copy so then I could ask you specific questions about it as well. But before we do wrap up, I've got a couple of seeds to sow questions.
Okay.
What's one thing that you'd like our listeners to understand about financial well-being that maybe they're not hearing elsewhere?
And I'm going to come back to that it's not you, that it's not, you shouldn't blame yourself, that this isn't your fault. You can always improve and you can always learn more, but it's normally like it's very rarely your fault that if you feel like you're in a bad situation, and we should be supporting each other and learning together and raising our communities up, because that's what we need to fight this kind of systemic inequality.
That's very empowering. Thank you. Now, on the flip side, what's one policy or market change that you think would make the biggest difference from people experiencing like maybe income volatility?
Yeah. So I think flexi payments is really the thing that is striking me as, it just seems a bit of a no-brainer having more flexibility around how and when people pay. I think that means trusting people more as well, because one of the reasons why financial service providers often want deadlines or set days is that they can use punitive measures to force people to pay, or to punish people who don't pay. But like we saw during COVID, where they had to kind of suspend a lot of their punitive measures, that the profits of financial service firms didn't go down, right? So those punitive measures, as much as they think they're raising money, or they may think they're raising money, they're probably preventing a lot of people from doing good things with their money as well. So yeah, I think a new understanding of systems of payment, which allows for some flexibility and some trust of people, is where I would go with that.
I echo that. I second that, because I've had periods of my life when financially I needed a little bit of help. And if you could easily get that from an institution rather than asking from family and friends, then that would reduce so much stress for a lot of people. So I second that on that policy. Thank you so much. Where can people find you if they wanted to kind of get into more detail around what we've discussed today, or your research, and to come, your book that will be coming out soon?
My research centre has a website. If you search for CPFW, Centre for Personal Financial Wellbeing at Aston, you should find the page. But I'm very active on LinkedIn. So if people want to get in touch with me directly, LinkedIn is a really good place to find me. And I tend to respond fairly quickly and things like that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Hayley.
Thank you, Arlyne. It's been lovely talking to you.
That is all for us today, guys. Join us next week for some more seeds to sow. And please remember to support us by following and leave a rating on our show on whichever platform you're listening to us from. To those watching on YouTube, please leave a like and a subscribe to our channel. All of your support goes a long way. Thank you so much for joining us today. And remember, keep shining.